How's it going? This is Dylan with Dylan Pickups and DylanTalksTone.com. Today we're going to talk about cables. Cables are the thing that everybody kind of forgets about, but they are one of the most important things about our guitar signal, because that's how we get our signal from the guitar to the amp, the pedal board to the amp. So what are some things we need to understand about guitar cables? Well, the biggest thing is that obviously we want them to be quiet, we want them to be flexible, real usable and stuff. But what statistics are we looking at? The most common one that everybody thinks about is picofarads per foot, PF per foot. The typical cable is somewhere between 40 and 50 or so picofarads per foot. The cables we make here are at 21 picofarads a foot. And why does that matter? What is that? Why is having that number so low so important? If you look at how a guitar cable is made, okay, there is the center conductor, there is the insulation, and then there is the outer copper conductor, and then the outside jacket that we always see when it's laying on the ground. The center conductor is where the signal goes. The outside grounded part right here is the part that we consider our ground, okay? There's an interesting thing we need to understand about electronics that does apply to cables, and that is capacitance. And what this means is when you have signal on the inside and you have ground on the outside, this spot in the middle right here, electricity can still go through that insulation. And because electricity is always trying to find the path of least resistance to ground, there's always going to be some loss of signal off of that center conductor that goes out to ground, and we lose that signal. Think of it like the center conductor is steaming, right? It's not losing everything, but it's steaming off, if you will, kind of if you could visualize that, some to ground all the time. Now the number that we see, the 40 picofarads per foot, the 20 picofarads per foot, etc., is the cable's ability. It's usually the most important part is this white part right here, is the cable's ability to stop stuff from steaming off the cable and escaping to ground. Because the very first thing that escapes to ground is high frequencies. So a cable that has a high capacitance, just like the capacitor in your guitar, the higher the number, the more frequency it can pull out. The same thing with the cable. The higher the capacitance, the more frequencies you'll lose over a distance. Now, will you hear this all the time? Everybody uses this magic number of like 18.5 feet. Anything longer than that, you're going to hear a difference in a bad cable. That's kind of a fallacy. There's really no magic number of, I can hear a difference between the cables that we build and run-of-the-mill off-the-shelf cables on a 10-foot cable. Okay, I can feel that, I can hear that difference. But there's something that's very important that needs to be understood, is that a cable cannot put back in high frequencies, number one, and number two, it cannot take noise and eliminate it. Okay, it only can be good at not picking up more noise as it lays on the ground. All right, so what this means is the lower number of picofarads per foot, our cables are like 21, most cables are right around 40. Even the real expensive kind that we will not talk about in this video are still pushing 40, okay? Even though they advertise whatever they advertise, they test pushing 40, all right? So are they worth all that money? I don't know. Because that is really the number we're looking at. So are we going to hear a lot of a difference from a 21 picofarad cable over a 40 picofarad per foot cable? That depends on the noise floor of the rest of our guitar. It depends on whether the components in the guitar are good, okay? But if you have a nice rig, then yeah, even at 10 feet, you can tell a difference going from 40 down to 20 picofarads per foot. It definitely is a difference. But again, the quality of the cable cannot take out noise, and it cannot put highs back in. If they're not there to begin with, you're not going to hear them anyway. And if your guitar is noisy, the cable is not going to quiet it back down. Remember that the pickups are what you start with. So if the pickups are noisy, if the pickups don't have much high end, then you got to fix that first before you get to this cable thing. The cable is going to only further attenuate it, further cut it down. Okay? So, that being said, if you have a really bright guitar and you want to cut some of those highs out permanently, get a higher capacitance cable. And you might laugh at that, but that is a thing. You can actually make that part of your tone. Okay? So just because there's one lower than the other doesn't mean you necessarily always want it. Those guys that use those coily cords for some reason, those coily cords, they're a very high capacitance cable, but they use them for a reason because it does introduce, it cuts frequencies and it makes it sound a certain way. That's all there is to it, okay? Now, the other thing that has been kind of coming up on Facebook and the internet a lot lately about cables is this balanced versus unbalanced thing. Okay, there's quad conductor and tri-conductor cables, and they say they're going to be quieter, they're going to be hum canceling, they're going to get rid of noise, they're going to be much lower capacitance than a regular guitar cable. All of that, I don't know how to say it nicely, all of that is basically wrong. Like I said, you cannot take cable noise out. You can't take noise out with a cable. The cable is only going to transmit and further attenuate anything that enters the cable from the guitar. All right? Now, when we start talking about the balanced versus unbalanced thing, we need to understand how a balanced circuit works. Most guitars are an unbalanced signal. The signal line and the ground with the insulation in the middle. Okay? So if we look at a balanced versus unbalanced signal, and you might not be able to see this very good, I just couldn't find a very good graphic of it. You notice over on this side, there's two amplifiers taking two identical signals, sending them to the amp. Okay, so here's how a balanced signal works. You take two identical signals, except transmit one of them out of phase. So they're out of phase with each other. Okay? That has to happen before it enters the cable. It goes through the cable, comes to the other end, and then gets flipped back around, and then that is how you cancel the signal. So these two signals are identical, except that they're out of phase with each other. Your guitar cannot do that unless it's like a Les Paul recording or some crazy thing like that. Most guitars cannot do that. If you have a 1/4-inch jack that is a tip and a ring, like a normal thing, no matter how many cables you twist up in between there and the amp, or in between there and in between your pedals, you cannot make an unbalanced signal over here before it goes through that cable and comes over here and gets flipped back. You can't do it. So it doesn't do any good to coil up 4 cables and stick them in. In fact, because you are cumulatively using these cables together, many people will say, well, isn't your capacitance going to be lower because if I use this super low capacitance cable? Well, if you twist them up together, it's just doubling it up anyways. So it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything. That's a thing that's been out there quite a bit, and it just doesn't make sense. When we're talking about how good is a good cable, okay? What do we want? We want low capacitance, we want low resistance, we want good flexibility, and we want the thing to be durable. So what are we looking at when we talk about low capacitance? There's two main areas where this happens. It's the overall diameter of the center conductor, and it is the quality and diameter of this white stuff right here in the middle, okay? And this has to do with any kind of coaxial cable. If we wanted to really make this a low capacitance cable, we could just make the thing huge, but then it wouldn't bend and flex. So what we want is a good compromise, basically, of that it gives us a low capacitance, that gives us a good durable cable that you can step on and stuff and not break. And the shielding really needs to be above 95 to 97% shielding. Some popular cables out there use a foil that wraps around the whole cable. But this adds diameter and stiffness. The one we use is actually a braid, but it's a very high density braid. It retains flexibility that way. That way you can still bend the thing around like on pedal boards and stuff. So what if you only have one good cable? This is the other thing. If you only have one good cable, where do you put it? Where do you put your better cable? With a passive circuit, a passive guitar with passive pickups in it. Remember that you are doing nothing but losing with a passive signal from the pickups on out. So the least amount of loss is probably the most helpful before the pedal board. Once we put a buffer in there with a pedal, any kind of the buffer like a boost or an overdrive or anything that has a buffer in it, even a tuner that has a buffer in it, then all the cables after that in that signal chain, that has a lot less effect on how much loss there is because you've now buffered that signal back to like a unity gain. And we'll get into that and why that's important later. But if you have one good cable, put it from the guitar to the pedal board. And that's just a little tip for you. And if you need more of them, let me know. My name is Dylan. This has been Dylan Talks Tone with Dylan Pickups. If you have any questions or anything you want to know, check us out at dylanpickups.com. Check us out at dylantalkstone.com. Check us out on Facebook. And we will talk to you all very, very soon. Have a great day.